Hey there, and welcome to the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast. I'm TJ Hoisington, and it was my privilege today to interview Fawn Germer.
My passion and my mission to help you unleash your greatness within. My heart goes out to the underdogs that's on their way. If you think you can go from good to great, okay, let's motivate. GreatnessWithin.com. TJ Hoisington. GreatnessWithin.com.
You see, Fawn is a 4-time Pulitzer Prize nominee. Her books have gone on to become international bestsellers, and it was my privilege today to interview her for her new book titled Coming Back. And I love the subtitle, How to Win the Job You Want When You've Lost the Job You Need. Powerful book, but let me tell you something. We dig into it in this interview. We go into specifics on how to communicate with people, how to network with people, how to open doors when you think all the doors are closed. Really tactical things you can do, starting with email or networking on social media and so forth. I tell you what, she lays it all on the line, and it was such a pleasure to have her on the show. This interview with Fawn Germer was powerful, and I know you're gonna love it. So without any further ado, let's jump right into the interview. Fawn, welcome to the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast.
TJ.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And I got to tell you, I have a copy of your book. I've read through it. I don't know if you can actually see it there. Here
I like seeing little sticky notes in my book.
Yeah, and folded.
How many pages you folded over.
Oh,
see,
a lot.
listeners, it's filled with a wealth of information, right?
Amen to that. So I have a question for you, and I found it later in the book. And what I really am getting at is a little bit of your backstory. So here's what I read later on. You say, quote, "There will be times when you will be forced by circumstances to regroup and perhaps start over." And then you say, "The economy has collapsed on me 3 times in the last 20 years. There was 9/11, there was the Great Recession of 2008, and now there is the COVID-19 pandemic." Fawn, would you give us a little bit of the backstory into your world and how maybe a little bit of how the book came about?
All right, so let's even go before all of that, because sometimes it's not going to be a national crisis that forces you to regroup, but it could be your divorce, because that certainly was a big deal for me.
Yep. And
it could be, well, it's famous that I had the world's worst boss hole when I was a reporter in Denver. And because he was so horrible, and I finally took my power and said, that's it, and left. That pushed me to the next thing. And it's like, life is like a bunch of dominoes. And if you have faith that they tend to fall in order to get you right here to where you need to be, then it's not so worrisome. So if I hadn't gone through my divorce and had that bad boss and then moved to Tampa to be an editor at the paper there, and then failed as a manager because I'd never done it and I was an investigative reporter who was brusque and impatient, went looking for a book on how to be a strong woman in a male-dominated environment. Yeah. There wasn't one. So somebody says, you ought to write that book. And I end up interviewing great women leaders for their mentoring wisdom. And they all talked about taking risk and betting on yourself. So I quit my job to write my book and live my dream, and couldn't get a publisher.
Yep.
And I kept trying, hitting the wall.
Yep, been there. Yeah.
Figured out the problem. Book came out the day before 9/11. Now, that's significant because it's a miracle that book came out at all, because the universe had sent so many signals that dream was never going to happen. But I believed in it, and I believed in myself. So for those of you who are starting to doubt yourself, listen here, okay? So I had been rejected by every major publisher in the United States, figured out the problem, got a publisher, Penguin Putnam. Again, came out the day before 9/11. They canceled my tour, and it looked like all hope was lost. But I lived in a town called Lutz, Florida at the time, which is north of Tampa. And the PR person from Borders, which was this thing we used to have called a bookstore, which was a store where they had books.
Yep.
But she wrote me and she said, "We got the weirdest email from your publisher." And it said, understandably, the author has decided not to tour at this time for safety concerns. She says, so you can't make it from Lutz to South Tampa? And I said, of course I can. They gave up. She goes, well, why are you giving up? And so I say this to the people who are paying attention, listening to this and watching it. Why are you giving up? Because when she did that, she said, I know everybody you need at Borders in the country. And I got in the car and I drove and stayed with every person I knew in every possible town. And I wrote 29 letters to Oprah, and something broke through. And this book that had been rejected everywhere winds up becoming a #1 bestseller before it becomes an Oprah book. And it's just a reminder that you have obstacles. You will always have obstacles. And how you handle them is how you unleash your greatness, right? Yeah. So in my particular case, it was just taking the next step and the next. And so I had this big bestseller at a time when they needed a book with a lot of wisdom in it. And the book was called Hard-Won Wisdom. And then started, because of the obstacles I'd had, somebody said, you ought to be a professional speaker. And I studied that and I thought, well, I can do that. And so I was ready and I had this great speaking career. And then 2008 happens. And that's when, of course, we had the Great Recession. And I started to watch tens of thousands of people being laid off all at the same time. And I thought this will really impact the speaking business, because they're not going to buy expensive speakers for expensive events if they're laying off tens of thousands of people. So I got this idea that I was going to write a book, and it was called Finding the Up in the Downturn. And it had my picture branded on the cover. And it was really on how to succeed in spite of what was going on with the economy. And I wrote that thing and put it out in 6 weeks. And it did sell thousands of copies, but it really was designed to be a press kit so that I would send this to companies and they would say, oh, she's speaking on what we're going through. We need her. So like what happened at 9/11, there was this great opportunity to succeed when others were giving up. So my business went way up that year because of that. And so then let's fast forward to 2020. That's what they call that year, right? 2020.
2020.
Yeah. And 2020, there was that week in March where every one of my speaking events collapsed.
Me too.
Because of course, with pandemic,
Oh, yeah.
you know, they're not getting big conventions together. And it was like boom, 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 boom. And I remembered I was standing in my kitchen and I started to laugh because I thought, well, I've been here before. And then I remembered that I always say, because of that, there is a huge opportunity to succeed in moments when everyone else is giving up. And then I started laughing even harder because I thought, you have a book coming out in January on how to get your career back on track, whether you're struggling at work or you're unemployed. And there will be millions, yes, there it is, millions and millions of people needing this. And this is a book called Coming Back. It's like, could not have better timing than that. And so here I am. And I just want people who are listening to understand that I know it's frustrating right now and it's scary for many of you. But don't lump yourself in the group with everyone else who's going to struggle and have difficulties. Put yourself in the group that's going to win in spite of it or because of it.
Well said. I love that vision, that tenacity. It's less about the circumstances and more about your mindset and your expectation to still succeed, that you still have life in you. I think when I was reading your book, it was evident throughout the book, and I'm amazed with the number of actual tools that you give in the book. I mean, things like, here are questions you should be asking if you have an interview. Just think about these questions. Be prepared to answer them. You'll be better prepared when you go in an interview, right? There's so many little nuggets, but what you just explained was something you wrote about called accept, cope, and adapt. That's the key. Accept the reality of where you're at, cope with it, re-strategize, retool yourself, and then continue to go forward, right? Adapt and then go and achieve. Any thoughts around that?
That is my core coping strategy.
Ah,
And that did not arise out of a professional need to learn to accept, cope, and adapt. It came out of something very important and very personal.
mm,
And it gave me a resilience that I am committed to teaching others to have. So I had a mother who, when she was 66, had a stroke and was paralyzed. And then 10 years later got Alzheimer's. And sometimes people, when there is crisis, just look to get everything fixed and back to normal. But we knew there was no going back to normal. And particularly with Alzheimer's, initially, you just want to do the one thing to get that person to remember, and it's not going to work. And I remember when my mom, it was shocking what was going on. And so I would try to get her to remember my father by quizzing him on things that only my dad would know. And
right.
it didn't, you can't do that. And I learned that the faster I learned to accept, cope, and adapt, the faster I could have joy in my life and gratitude for what we still had. So my mom was sick with Alzheimer's for 10 years. And anybody who's been through that knows that it is a very challenging, difficult thing. But for those 10 years, I had so much love and joy and an intimacy with my mother that few daughters can have, because I wasn't so tearful and worried about what we'd lost. I learned to accept, cope, and adapt. So when COVID started, I get on my Facebook page and I put out a video and I said, accept, cope, and adapt.
Mm.
Because the faster you do that, the faster you get on with things and make it work. So a lot of people didn't do a very good job of that in 2020. They kept blaming the year 2020 and couldn't wait for 2020 to end. And I kept saying, you don't know, 2021 might be even worse. And, on January 6th, it didn't look too good, right?
Yep.
Don't waste a year of your life or a month of your life or a week of your life. Just live today and make your mind up that no matter what's happening, even if you are facing great adversity with your career or personally, but make up your mind that you're going to do something meaningful and fulfilling every single day. So, the timing of my new book is perfect. And I'm getting a lot of media attention, which of course I love, because it'll sell books. But
Of course, right?
Newsweek did this interview and they asked how I did during the pandemic.
Mhm.
And I have this great line. I said, well, business was a challenge, but the kayaking was fabulous.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, I am not going to waste a minute of my life. And so if somebody is unemployed out there or hitting the wall at work, don't waste the day. Don't waste a day. I always say, never waste a sunset. Go out and take a look, or a sunrise if you are up early. Live your life. Be with people. You don't know what's coming. All you know is what you have right now. And so, that's probably more like my old books are a little bit more into that life empowerment zone, but
which is needed now probably more than many other times, especially through times of pandemic, right? So
right. I know it's a lot of people aren't at their best, and it's sad because I've seen people who are normally very kind people do things that are very cruel, and I've seen people who are very organized just falling apart, and people who seem very secure becoming very angry. And don't be in that category. I know it's easy to be overwhelmed by everything. These are uncertain times, but the one thing you can be certain of is that you have a day to live, and it's on you how you choose to live it.
love it. Love it. That sounds like one thing you wrote in the book was stop catastrophic thinking. In fact, that's on page 70. And I just think, as I've taught people over the years, when you have, and I just want to get your take on it, when you have perceptives, but bad things that happen in your world, right? Many people will blow that bad experience out of proportion and shrink the good. What I've told people to do is when bad things happen, shrink the bad and focus on the good, blowing that out of proportion. Because
I
when you,
love that.
well,
That's
I just think about your mom. You know, you
yeah.
talked about her, and the three words that you brought up as you talked about her, and you were discussing how that was a trying time for, obviously, for her and the family, but for you as well. But you said, use the word gratitude, use the word love, and you use the word joy. When stress is high, and you look at this pandemic, and you're right, you know, this is going longer than what many people thought. I thought back in March, and I even did a video on it, 7 points to succeeding through this pandemic, thinking at the time maybe this would go 4-6 months
Right.
or so.
Right.
And now we are in 2021, and I'm going, wow, this is like feeling like you've run a marathon, and now you're asked to run a second marathon. And you think about people's backs are up against the wall, businesses are
Yeah.
lost that may never come back. The world is just turned upside down in many respects. But like you said, what are you focused on? Because you want to be focused on the things that are going to help you succeed in the future,
Right.
not the things that are going to keep you stuck in the past. Any thoughts around any of those concepts?
Well, there are people making money who are starting new businesses and figuring this out. And you know, that whole concept of catastrophic thinking is really important because our brains tend to go there.
Yes.
And it's not a healthy way of operating a life. Now, my brother, he'll get a kick out of me saying this, but he way back in like a year ago, January, right when things were going on in China, my brother sends me this text. Are you afraid of the coronavirus?
Mm-hmm.
And I write him back, no, because I know the odds are zero I'm going to get it. And he goes, really? I think we need to worry about the coronavirus. Jim, the odds of you getting the coronavirus are zero. And don't worry about it. And we went back and forth on this. And he says, I think I should buy some masks. Now, this is before we've even had a case in this country. I said, we don't need any masks, right? So I was wrong, right? But, and then, I said, the odds of you dying of it are zero. And it's like, that's our fake reality. And so things have shifted so much that my brother's actually right. What happened there? But we have this ability inside of our brains to go from, well, maybe I'll get it, to I'm going to die from it. Or maybe my business will struggle to, I'm never going to make another dollar again. And we have to stay in the game and figure out what we're going to do to make it work. Always have a strategy on something else you can do. And the biggest thing I always tell people is just take the next step, figure out what your end goal is. And
well, who would take the next step? So going back on what you've said, who would take the next step if they thought there's a high probability that their life is over?
Somebody who listens to me. He's like, I always tell people you can do it the hard way or listen to me. And, I've got notoriously bad feet. They get me where I'm going, and I love them. I love my feet. But what I like to do really long beach walks and of 10 to 13 miles. And by mile 7, these feet are killing me. They're screaming, stop, stop. And I learned a long time ago that if I just put my left foot out and then my right and then the left and then the right, I get where I need to go. And so for people who are having trouble getting on course and figuring out what they do, figure out where you'd like to be and then just keep taking one more step and one more step and one more step. It's the problem that occurs is when you buy into this idea that there's no opportunity or that everything is depressing and you stop.
That's right.
And that just means more opportunity for those of us who don't.
There is a chance we could all get it. There's a even smaller chance that if you get it, you will pass away. It's still a reality that it could happen. But let's not stop our life in the thought or the hope that it doesn't happen. Let's act as if, let's keep working hard. Let's protect ourselves. Let's wear our masks. Let's wash our hands. Let's do all those precautionary things, but let's live our lives. And that's what I got out of your book is this, that it wasn't about coronavirus. It was just about living a life that thrives. Any thoughts about that?
Well, did you kind of, when you went into the lockdown, realize there was a moment where it was like, this is kind of nice?
Oh, 100%. And the people,
Right.
the leaders
And
I coach felt that way, right? It's
yeah,
just, yeah,
it's, and there were things that I could do professionally that I could never have done because of technology,
yeah,
but there was this gratitude because you're like me. We have our money's out on the road. So we're speaking, and it's out there. And I couldn't go out there. So suddenly here I am in Dunedin, Florida, which is an awesome place, right? And I knew it was awesome and I always love it. And I'm here a lot, but my travels out there, well, I have barely left Dunedin in a year and a half. And I'm good with that.
I
I
agree.
came up with a routine that is so awesome. It's like, okay, go get up, swim my laps, go here, go kayak. And it was so fun and also so fulfilling.
That's
So
right.
you really have to look at what you're doing in your life to add more and to not give up. If you're hitting the wall on something, there is a way. There's always a way. And so yeah, I totally agree with
And
you on that.
your life represents that. I mean, with the different pandemics and issues with the economy and so forth over the years. But like you said, I think of when you said just put one foot in front of another. We've both written books. We both have best-selling books. There were times I got writer's block. There were times I got stuck. And or there were times when I had this idea to start a book and then I kept procrastinating it because I didn't know what I was going to say. And it wasn't until I started to write chapter 1 and start working through that. Once I got chapter 1 out of the way, it blew me away. How many more ideas came to me? How many things I
Right.
noticed in my world or I heard from conversations that then lend itself into the next chapter and the next chapter, and things grow. The key is exactly what you're saying. You've got to keep moving.
Yeah, and I'm a cyclist and have done a lot of centuries in my time. And the hardest miles are, so a century is 100 miles. The hardest miles for me are miles 60 to 80.
Okay.
Because once you get to mile 80, you know you've got it licked and you can get there. And the problem with COVID is we're stuck at mile 60.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Right.
But we'll get there. It's just not today.
Exactly. Well, and you say here, quote, on page 52, the way to create job security is to always act as if you don't have it. Always be in action mode.
Right.
And then you say, when interviewing, tell what you will do instead of relying on what you have done. I think
Yeah, that is a huge mistake people make is they want their experience to count for something. They think it affords them a degree of respect. The problem is that the world has changed so dramatically, and a lot of people who are more veteran employees, which would be people in my age group, didn't do the homework to justify the fact that their paycheck was higher than people coming in off the streets as millennials or Gen Zers who could do more technologically for half the price or a third the price. And so
that's good.
Justification for your job is not, yeah, but I've got 30 years of experience, when that experience does nothing to move a company or an industry forward the next 5 and 10 years. All of your old skills are seen as kind of not badges of honor, but badges of hashtag has been. So you don't want to be the has been. You have to upskill yourself. And that means you take courses and do what it's going to take to be relevant. There's so much free online learning at edX and Coursera.org because you need to know how your industry is changing with things like artificial intelligence and blockchain and
That's right.
big data, machine learning, robotics. And you take these courses so that you can justify what you're going to do in the future. You don't have to be a programmer, but you have to know what the programs need to do. And then your experience is a differentiating factor. But if all you've got is that you were really smart and effective in the past, sadly, it doesn't count for much.
Bob Moawad, who I wrote the book, The Secret of the Slight Edge with many years ago, would always say, when you're coasting, that only implies that you're heading downhill.
Yeah, right.
You know,
That's a great line.
and so I think, so that leads us into my next point, which you spend a lot of time on in the book, which I think is a good reminder for everybody. I know it was a good reminder for me, although being in the speaking and authoring book business, I'm always reinventing myself. I'm always rebranding myself. The key with our line of business is to stay relevant in the world.
Right.
But if you've been working in a job for 18 years, 22 years, and it's been, let's say, comfortable, hard work, but comfortable, right? And all of a sudden the world changes around you, you almost have to start from ground zero and become relevant again. How do you differentiate yourself? Any thoughts around branding or relevancy and so forth?
That's all really important. And it's easy to feel overwhelmed if deep in your gut, you know that you're behind. And that's the first thing, is to admit you're behind.
That's good.
I'm so tired of people saying, oh, I'm tech savvy. And no, you're not. I'm sorry. You don't know what a millennial knows. So that you are already behind. But I go back to the days when I was a journalist, and they were getting these machines in the newsroom that were going to hook us up with something that was called the information superhighway. And they kept talking about the information superhighway. And it was going to change everything about how we got information. And I went on vacation and I came back and they had already done the training on the information superhighway. So there I was, untrained. They weren't having a makeup training. And I kept watching the other reporters going and using the information superhighway machines. For 3 weeks, I was so terrified that I was so far behind and really feared for my career. And I didn't say anything. And then finally, I looked at the woman in front of me and I said, I don't know how to use the information superhighway. And she says, oh, come here. And she drags me across the newsroom and tells me to sit down and says, what are you writing? And I said, I'm doing a series on casino gambling in Colorado. And she says, okay. So she typed that in on this search engine. And then she says, hit search. I did. And then she goes, and these links come up. So of course, I'm talking about the internet, right? So these links come up. Okay, click one of those. And I did. And it was an article related to what I was doing. I go, oh, that's neat. And she goes, okay, now you know how to use the information superhighway. But it was something that seemed so impossible to learn, and it wasn't that bad. And that's why if you are behind, you just take the first step and you go to Coursera.org or edX.org and you look for something. These classes are free and they're given from Stanford and MIT and Wharton and Harvard and Yale and hopefully the University of Florida, my prestigious alma mater. But all of these schools have free courses and you don't need the credit. So don't worry about passing the test. You need the knowledge. So learn about what's happening in your industry. And before you decide what to take, Google trends in, if you're insurance, trends in the insurance business. And then if you're an actuary, trends for actuaries.
Oh, that's good.
What really was interesting to me was one of the CEOs that I interviewed for my book. And, you know, I did 300 interviews for this project. So I went really deep. And one of the CEOs blurted out that 90% of the effort in that office was figuring out how to replace human beings with artificial intelligence. And when I had to get the release signed, they wanted to see the quotes. And of course, they didn't want that attached to the name. But I thought it was so revealing, and it's so true. They want to replace us with machines, but someone has to know how to direct the machines. So you don't have to be a programmer. You have to be a visionary. You have to learn about innovation. I took a class in innovation from MIT. Again, I think this was at edX. And it was fantastic. And it was my first online class like that. And I was really trying hard to score high on the test. And I thought, you don't need the credit. You have a master's degree. You don't need a diploma. All you need is information. And so I want you all to remember that. You need the information. Don't worry about getting an A on the test. Just get the knowledge. And then you rebrand yourself. And you do that by, of course, putting things on your resume that you've studied and learned about. But in conversations with people, you say, you know, I was doing a class through MIT on innovation, and I learned that blah, blah, blah. Or, you know, I just did this class in AI over through Harvard. And they say, and then the things you're saying in conversation brands you then as current and relevant. And then the other thing to remember,
that's really good,
is, and we all know that networks are important, and we've said that forever, but I have heard so many people say, oh, you can't network during COVID. You can network better than ever during COVID because nobody has anything to do. So I just sent an invite out today to this group of executives that I started this back in the lockdown. And these are very, very, very senior people you read about in big national newspapers. They're too busy to ever get them together, ever. It wouldn't happen. You would be sending calendar questions for months and months, and it still wouldn't happen. But it was the lockdown, so I just sent an email to 15 of them and said, I'm going to do a Zoom call on Tuesday at 6 p.m. Come if you want to. And there were 15 of them there because nobody's doing anything.
right?
And we're still meeting. We're just sent the invite out for this month's call because people are available and they want things to do. And so if you need to expand your network, get on LinkedIn, figure out the companies where you are trying to head, and then add people from those companies. And don't send those transparent, gross, self-serving emails as soon as you get with the person connected. No, just comment on their posts, say, hey, that was a great post, start a little bit of a conversation.
Be
and then
human.
once they know you're alive and that you have a heartbeat, then say, hey, I'm really interested in that company. Would you even consider doing a 15-minute Zoom and coffee with me? And some people say no, but most people say yes. So this is a great time to use a network. Don't be afraid, ask for what you want, and then make it happen.
Yeah, you say here, experience doesn't count anymore. Do what counts instead. And that's what you're talking about, branding yourself, putting yourself out there, learning more in a particular area of goals that you have and where you want to move toward. And those are all, correct me if I'm wrong here, but those are all things, that we can do from home. I think of the world we live in today where we have the internet and we have all these resources for learning more things compared to where we were a few decades ago. And I think what an opportunity that even if we are staying home more often, right, that we can actually learn at the same time and grow our relevance from the home.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Powerful stuff. And it says here on page 44, your to-do list involves attitude and action. I think that's key. There's always a balance between having that positive attitude, but that positive attitude has to lead to doing some sort of action, because as you start laying those seeds down, right, it'll start to grow, and it's not going to happen overnight. So you say also complacency drives elimination. I love
people who say, I'll just keep my head down and sit this one out, or I'm just going to lie low. You're painting yourself invisible. You will be expendable and you will lose your job. At some point, you will lose your job. Just, you heard it here. That will happen. The market does not tolerate that anymore.
So what you're saying is, if you're comfortable now and your job maybe has been okay through the pandemic, you're saying, no, don't stop there.
No, I'm saying there's a difference. If you may be performing and up to date and everything. If you are not current and relevant and thinking you're going to sit it out,
that's right,
then you're going to get nailed. And that is going to happen. And the other thing is that it can seem so overwhelming to have to take those first steps into technology, because sometimes it's intimidating. And I like to tell this story about blockchain, because that is a science that I didn't get very well. And it's the idea that one piece of data travels. So it's like cryptocurrency, that if you get my Bitcoin, it's not mine anymore. It only exists with you. And I don't explain that well because it is so confusing. So I kept reading these articles and not understanding it. And it's important with cryptocurrency, but also supply chain, and a lot of other industries are using it. So I didn't understand the article. So then I started hitting YouTube, and YouTube is a good place to go if something's confusing you, because somebody has simplified it. Right. But nobody could simplify Bitcoin until the moment, or not Bitcoin, blockchain. The moment when I saw a YouTube video that was 4 minutes long, and it was how to teach blockchain to a 5-year-old. And then I got it. Because if you go to the simplest way to absorb something, then you get the concept. And then if you want to take more, you take more. You don't have to be a programmer, but you have to understand everything. And then to the people who get annoyed by how much social media is going on, that's the way it is. That's our future. There is no choice. Get on board.
I did read that in your book. Stop pushing back on the social media thing, but use it with a purpose. Rather than just surfing, use it with some goals in mind, and you'll be more effective if you do that. You also said stop complaining. Misery loves company.
Oh, that is so important. Whether we're talking about personally or professionally right now, you can easily find people who are talking negative, who see no opportunity, who are really toxic people and may not even mean to be.
Right. But
there's so much toxicity out there and so much negativity. And when you're around that, you absorb it. And that becomes your perspective and your reality. So if you're out of a job and someone else is out of a job and they tell you they have made 1,000 applications and there's no way and it's never going to happen, you believe that's your reality.
That's right.
Instead of saying, what's it take to break through here? And really let that person make 1,000 applications. Work on your network. A network's what's going to deliver for you.
That's really good. I want you to talk on this real quick as we start winding down. I don't know if you termed it this way, or maybe it was just me in my writing. When dissed, keep in mind, it isn't personal.
Oh yeah. So if you get rejected or you might get dissed at work, they may stop respecting you, right? You have to understand that's happening to millions and millions and millions of people.
Yeah. And
your ownership in it is if it happens and you don't do what it takes to make yourself relevant. You got to be relevant. That if you're not current, you're going to get dissed. If you get rejected for a job and then another and another and another, it's not personal. You may need to do things to improve your chances in your application, but I give a story in there which tells you what's going on. So as a journalist, I did a lot. I have a lot of credentials. I had been nominated for the Pulitzer Prize 4 times. And when my first book was out being rejected, I thought I better get a job because I quit to write the book. And I thought, well, wow, they are looking for a journalism professor at Manatee Community College. And I went there when I was first out of school. So I'm going to apply for this job because I'm a really good journalist and I taught college and graduate students for more than a dozen years. I'm a slam dunk for this. I mean, it's community college, right? Slam dunk. And I didn't even get an interview. And being that I was an investigative reporter and that has never left me, I also knew that all of those applications for that job were public record. And I couldn't figure out why I hadn't gotten an interview. So I requested the applications of every person who got an interview. And only one person had gotten an interview. And that person's entire journalistic experience was working as a radio host on a show on Saturdays in Des Moines, Iowa. Whereas I'd worked for the Washington Post and Miami Herald. I didn't even get an interview. So I had a friend who was a professor there and I said, find out what happened there.
Yeah.
And she came back and she said, this guy had been working as a part-time professor for years. They just posted it because they had to. Had nothing to do with me. And you don't understand what's going on behind the scenes and how often I have been at lunch with people and heard them say, hey, who do you know who can do X, Y, or Z? Because that's how things happen. They want a referral in. So instead of saying, I don't know the right people, get to know the right people. Like I said, you get on LinkedIn, you add the people that you need, and then you somehow find a way to ingratiate yourself to them by being of use to them.
That's right.
And then you ask for what you want. And when you need help, be specific. You put in your subject line, personal favor. And then you say, I'm interested in this job. Can you please walk my resume or send it to so-and-so, talk to him or her about it, and then set up a call or an introductory email between us so that I could then do a Zoom and coffee. Say exactly what you want because it works. You call in the chits.
Wow. Throughout this whole interview, you have given these little, very specific and tangible nuggets that can help someone from wherever they're at right now. It all starts with believing it's possible, and then lead that to actually take some of your advice, and where they'll end up months from now will be in a totally different place. But they have to have the belief, don't you think? Even if they're not feeling confident, I always teach the golden rule of confidence is don't wait till you feel confident before you take action. No, instead, as you take action, the feelings of confidence will come.
Right.
So
Yeah.
start taking those steps, like you said in the beginning, even if they're small. That would be my message as well. Okay, I have a couple other things I want to share from your book, but before we do that, how can people get your book? Where could they find you? What resources maybe do you have for the guest today?
Fantastic. Okay, so you can find the book just about anywhere. The book is called Coming Back: How to Win the Job You Want When You've Lost the Job You Need. And it is relevant whether you are job hunting or you're in a job and you feel like you're being shoved aside a little bit. So it's really a career. Some guy told me, he says, it's what to do when you think your career is about to kick the bucket.
Yeah. Oh, great.
Yeah. So that's, we'll get the link to you on that. And then I've got a couple of freebies. One is on how to reboot your career during COVID, and the other is on how to just take the next step. So I'll get the link so you can put that
We'll put that in the description. Okay.
Right, in the YouTube. And then, of course, go to fawngermer.com, which is FAWNGERMER.com, fawngermer.com. And that's where you find me. I love to hear from people. Let me know what you're going through.
Thank you very much. I'm sure people will be very appreciative of that. You said later in the book, I'm not sure exactly, is it Angelus, former vice president? Did I say that right?
Yeah, Helene Angelus. She's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, former vice president of customer development for Procter and Gamble. And she shares three, and you share them in your book, 3 points that she lived by. First, know thyself. Second, every day, do something that scares you. And number 3, be a lifelong learner.
Yeah. Oh, number 3 right now is the most important. Because they want to see that. They want to see that you're insatiably curious. So if you can keep adding to your skills and your learning, you're valuable. And especially as you age in your profession, you have to show that. Because if you can't, you're not valuable. You're expendable.
And I would say being that insatiably curious also implies being humble enough to say you don't know something.
Right.
And
you have to say that the right way too.
I agree. I'm just saying the spirit of what I'm saying is you have to be willing to not think you know everything and say that there's probably some things I need to learn here. And there are people in your world that you can ask to get the information so you're caught up. Anyway, what was your thought that you were going to share?
Well, I was just thinking of somebody that I'm close to who is not tech savvy at all and gets discombobulated with a phone update. I'm serious.
Okay.
And she says, oh, I can't do this. They changed the system on my phone and I don't know how to run my calendar and I can't. Instead, what you say is, hey, how are you using this now? You just say, how are you? Instead of sounding like a dodo.
That's right. That's really good. That's what the way you position those questions are really important. So you don't lose the perception of your competence, right? Because you want to keep that perception high.
And if we have time, I want to just quickly make a point that I make in the book over and over again. It is so important that we connect between generations, and that
you did talk about that.
There is a clash between older workers and Gen Z and millennials, and that can't stand because the younger ones are now taking charge. They're in the leadership positions. They're defining roles. They're doing the hiring. So you have to be able to show that you will work with them, not acting like you know more than them or you deserve it more. So you have to be able to be a team player like that. And that means that you don't show that you are a fool on technology. Show that you're wanting to learn and that you're actively taking steps so that you can.
So ask those questions. Be curious.
Yeah.
I think when you ask someone, let's say they're younger and they have more inherent knowledge on a particular subject, show me how you do that. Or why did you do it that way?
Right.
Most
They
people
love that.
Exactly. Most
They
people are
love
going to
that.
want to share that information with you.
But you know what really ticks them off is when you say, well, 20 years ago when I was at IBM, we faced the same
Yeah, don't
thing.
say that. Yeah, that's good.
Right. Or even 3 years ago.
Right.
You know, you mentioned Helene, her son's in the book, and he gave the best quote in the whole book. He says, you may have 30 years of irrelevant experience and a millennial may have 2 years of relevant experience. In that case, the millennial is the expert. And that's the truth.
Love that. Wow,
Yeah.
you breathe a lot of fresh air. I love what you say in the very end. And by the way, check out the links below and make sure that you go to Fawn's website, fawngermer.com. But I love what you said at the back of the book, and I think it could be said at the very front as well. Quote, "You're not your job. You never were. You are fighting for the right to do the work." I love that. What is the measure of our creation is not just to have a job. It's to become all that we're capable of becoming. And that can only come by getting out of our comfort zone, which we're forced to right now, but learning from it and growing beyond it and not staying stuck 5 years in the 3 years in the past, 5 years in the past, 10, 20 years in the past. Reinvent yourself, figure out a way to do that. And you've given tools here today to help coach with that. Make sure that you get Fawn's book, Coming Back, right? I love the title. How to Win the Job You Want When You've Lost the Job You Need. All right, Fawn, any last words today in our interview here?
Tell everybody, just take the next step and then the next. You'll get where you need to go, but you have to keep moving forward.
Love it. Well said. Awesome. Thank you for being on the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast. I know that the audience will enjoy it, but get a lot out of it as well. Thank you for being here
My
today.
pleasure, TJ. Thank you.
You bet.
Podcast listeners, thanks for listening. You've taken time out of your schedule, and I really appreciate it. Now, do me a favor. If you like what you heard, star it. Thanks. Now go unleash your greatness within.
GreatnessWithin.com.